1998. So he brings with him a rich and a really long, diverse experience into this field of interaction design and HCA. And my association with Professor actually started around 2011 or 12 when I actually started referring my students as interns under his various projects, and he was quite gracious in admitting them. That some of the projects which I recall was that Swara Chakra project, that keypad design, the usability studies, some of which my students had worked on under Professor's guidance. Okay. So he is to the core HCA person. His PhD is in human computer interaction, right? So we can't have a better resource possibly towards the winding up phase of the workshop. Right? So without much delay, I hand over the session to Professor Joshi. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sparing your time, sir.
Most welcome. I'm happy to be here. So I can see that there are about 40 people in the meeting
room. Yeah, this is that morning schedule. They keep joining in late only, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But 40 is also a good number for a typical HCI class. Our classes tend to be even smaller than this. So I'm used to teaching very interactive classes. So this is really not a class. This is actually a sharing session, you can say. I'm going to share some of the work that we have done over the last several years. I hope I will be able to help people with some ideas about what they could do in their own work. I'm going to try a new feature which was introduced by Google fairly recently, and I haven't had an opportunity to try it out. So I'm going to try it out just now, which is that from my Google Slides, I can directly project into a Google Meet. Usually I use Zoom for my classes, so I haven't had the opportunity to do this. So if it doesn't work, then I will switch back to traditional screen sharing that we do.
Sure, sir. We can explore.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask to present this tab, and hopefully this will work. Will it work?
Does not it come?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it has come, sir.
Lovely.
The black color background slide.
Yeah, it's loading. It will take a few minutes.
Sure, sir.
Meanwhile, somebody said hi, so I'm also sort of figuring out Zooms. Yeah, good morning, Guna Seelan. Nice to meet you. Right. So I'm going to talk about designing for and with emergent users. So that is the topic, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But just to kind of introduce you to where I am sort of coming from. So if you kind of zoom into the western part of India and come closer, you will start realizing that Mumbai is sort of like an island, and you can start seeing that it is cut off from the mainland by rivers and creeks and things like that. And then if you zoom in further, you will realize that Mumbai is the shape of a V. Okay, and at the city is the shape of the V, and in the middle there is a large green patch here. And I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. Yes, you can. So there is a large green patch, and at the bottom of the green patch there are these two lakes, Vihar Lake and Powai Lake, and between those two lakes is IIT Bombay. So that's where I am right now. And so hello from IIT Bombay. Within IIT Bombay, I belong to a design school, which means we make things. For example, we make maps. This is the work of my colleague, Professor Mandar Rane, who made the map of IIT Bombay campus. He actually specializes in map design. So it's an interesting map. If I get an opportunity, I could talk about it. So this is the front of our building. And we have designed various objects over the years. So in 1979, Professor Mohan Bhandari designed this phone, and for you probably these days it might not seem to be so impressive, but back in 1970s, phones were moving from dial-based phones. So they went to tone-based phones, and so that called for a new design, and this is sort of a response. And if you see, it's a kind of a different kind of a design of a phone. Then back in 2002, Professor Ravi Puvaya designed this petrol station. So if you see, throughout the country, you will find wherever you find BPCL, Bharat Petroleum petrol stations, you will find this yellow wave on the top. So that is designed by Professor Ravi Puvaya. Then one of my other colleagues designed, Professor B.K. Chakravarti, he designed a post box which is being implemented on the 150th year of in the 150th year of the Indian Post, about 10 years ago now. But our famous, probably the most famous design is the rupee symbol. So Dr. Uday Kumar, now Professor Uday Kumar, he is currently a professor in IIT Guwahati, but he was our first PhD student when he designed this rupee symbol in 2010. More work by Professor Mandarani. This is the Mumbai metro map that he has been designing, and now Mumbai is adding some 7-8 metro lines, and it's going to be an interesting time ahead. And Professor Shilpa Ranade, she designed, she made the India's, let's say, first feature-length animated film, hand-drawn film. This is completely hand-drawn in that sense. Professor Girish Darvi designs typefaces. So this is one of the typefaces that he has contributed to. It's called Ek Mukta. It is available in several Indian languages. So I hope you like that. Professor Neena Sabnani won the Rajat Kamal Award for her best animation film in 2017. You can see that the President and the Vice President of India giving her the award. And in 2019, actually, a major exhibition was inaugurated based on Gandhiji's Dandi March. So we've finished 100 years of the Dandi March now. And it was designed by several faculty members, Kirti Trivedi, Raja Mohanty, B.K. Chakravarti, and Shilpa Ranade. And they actually invited about 80 sculptors to our institute, and they created 80 different statues, which were then converted to bronze. And this particular exhibition in Dandi, in Gujarat, was inaugurated by the Prime Minister in 2019. Right. So that's a little bit of background about myself. Now I'm going to talk about my own work for the rest of this talk. So this is about designing for and with emergent users. And so obviously it has two components. It is designing for and sometimes designing with emergent users in different ways. So first I'm going to kind of talk about what I mean by emergent users. So in December 2004, which is about 16 years ago, 17 years ago now, almost, there were about 81.7 million users of the internet, okay, or about 817 million, 81.7 crore users. In September 2020, which is about 7-8 months ago, during the current pandemic, there is an estimate that we had about 4.9 billion users, okay, or 492 crore users of the internet. Okay, so in the last 16-17 years, we've had about 494 new users per minute. So I have been talking now for 5 or 6 minutes. We probably have had 3,000 people who have used the internet for the first time in their lives. Okay, so that is the rate at which the internet has been growing consistently over the years. Right. So yeah, so that is the growth of the internet. It's very, very rapid. Now I'm asking you, I'm inviting you to kind of think about the day on which you use the internet for the first time. Perhaps some of you guys are so young that you don't remember the first time you used the internet. Maybe you were just a baby or something like that, and so you couldn't remember it. But today, but some of you, if you are slightly older, might remember the first day that you used the internet, you thought, wow, this is cool. Okay. And in the last 7 or 8 minutes, 3,000-4,000 people have actually used the internet for the first time in their lives also. So it is kind of an amazing thing that is happening constantly around the world, and we really do not realize how important and how impactful it is. Right. For us in our lab, we have always been interested in what we call the second half of the world, which is, so the world has, you might know that the world has about 7.7, 7.8 billion people, okay, about 780 crore people, if you are thinking crores. Okay, and so the first half, which is about 340 crore, 350 crores, sorry, 380 crores or so, is something that already a lot of people are catering to. A lot of companies, because it's a very profitable half in some sense. They have the money, they're willing to spend it, and so on. And so these are the people who get the first facilities. These are the people who are getting the first vaccines right now, for example. Okay, so they are sort of a well-off lot in some sense. In our group, we are interested in the second half, okay, of the world, which is the poorer half in some sense, also the less educated half, maybe lives in rural areas, but maybe even living in urban areas, but are poorer and so on. And generally, maybe they are older people, maybe there are more women in this group, and so on. So here is a quick look at how the household might be looking at. Now, this data is slightly old, about 10 years old to be exact. This is based on Census of India 2011, but 2011 is still the latest census that, yes, that is correct, emerging or potential half. Thank you, Shilpa. Yeah, so if you look at how these households were in 2011, so remember, this is a picture from 2011, and of course, a lot has changed in the last 10 years. A lot of progress has happened in the last 10 years throughout the country, as we can see. Okay, so, and I'm really keenly awaiting the next census. Hopefully, soon after the pandemic, we will conduct our census again, and we will update these numbers, and then we will see how it has changed. Okay, but in 2011, about 67% households had electricity. Okay, and about 64% households had landlines or mobile phones. So had a phone of some sort. And I know that this number has for sure changed. We are now currently near 100%, about 98, 99% penetration of mobile connectivity, and about 90, 92% penetration of electricity, presumably. These are estimates. These are my estimates anyway. We will know for sure after the census. But I have come across households in India where people do not have electricity at home, but they do have mobile phone. You might think, how do they charge their mobile phone in that case? But there are people of that type. And already mobile phones had, in 2011, overtaken kitchens, because only 62% households had kitchens. 58%, 59% households had bank accounts. 57% households had a bathroom. So more mobile phones than bathrooms. 47% households had TV. 46% households had a toilet. 45% had a bicycle. 44% had tap water. So mobile phones had overtaken all of these things already. 21% had a two-wheeler, and only 5% households in India had a car. So you can see that compared to all of this, actually mobile phones sort of very quickly reached the Indian users in a very short period of time. In fact, I have more data about this. So this is the population of India in millions. If you don't like millions, if you are a crore person, then just cut off 10 and you get crores. And these are the number of mobile phones that or active SIM cards at various times over the last 30 years or so. Okay, so if you see, it was almost negligible all the way till about 2005, and then suddenly the numbers burst, and we now have about 115 crore, about 1150 million mobile SIM cards in India. And this purple line at the bottom, this dotted line at the bottom, actually shows the number of landlines that India has. And this is the number of internet users that India has. Okay, so if you see, this is also roughly following a similar path as that of mobile phones. So today we have about 750 million, 75 crore internet users, as estimated by some companies. And this dotted line shows the number of smartphones that are being sold in India. And this is actually growing a little faster than mobile phones, if you see. Yeah, it is true. It is still about half the population too. That is true. Yeah, but so this is sort of showing the number of smartphones that have been sold in India. Already more than 92 crore smartphones. So you might think anybody who uses a smartphone is typically using the internet, right? So why do we have more smartphones than internet users? Any guess? No guess? Rural areas, yeah, but people have a smartphone, so they presumably can use the internet still. So the reason why they have a smartphone but don't use the internet is because smartphones don't last for a long time. Okay, so typically smartphones last for 5 or 6 years. Feature phones tend to last for 10 years, and the basic phone tends to last for 15, 20 years even. So some people are still using very, very old phones. And the thing that actually dies in a phone is the battery rather than anything else in these phones. Whereas smartphones, the software itself just becomes too big to fit on the older phones. Okay, so we have been tracking one more number now. It is called less than 5-year-old. So this sort of brown gray line is the less than 5-year-old smartphones, and this roughly seems to be following the number of internet users, right? So this is the less than 5-year-old smartphones, and so we are actually having now a fair number of about 70 crores, 65 to 70 crores of less than 5-year-old smartphones. Even that number is pretty big. Okay, so all these numbers then are increasing very, very rapidly. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is on top of this, I'm going to actually overlay certain thoughts. So firstly, I'm going to look at education. So if you see literacy, so in 1991, so at the time of independence, let me start there actually, 1947, India had 80% population which was illiterate. Okay, by 1991, the number had come down to 57%. So we had managed to educate or at least make literate 43% of our population. By 2001, that number had come down to 35%. By 2011, the number had come down to 27%, and the current estimate is around 20%. Okay, so and this is interesting, and we will again know after the 21 census what the current number is exactly. But my expectation is around 19 or 20% as of now. And then at the other end of the scale are graduates. So in 2001, we had 4.4% graduates. In 2011, we had 6.5% graduates. Okay, if you and this graduates includes all engineering, medicine, law, design, all possible graduations that you can think of, art, commerce, all of those. Okay. Then if you see HSC diploma, that's like another 4.8% in 2001, 8.2% in 2011, metric another 10% in 2011, middle school 13%, and primary school 18%. And these are of course approximate lines that I have drawn within Google Slides itself. These are not very accurate graphs, but they give us an idea about how the numbers are rapidly changing. And what is more important is how these other lines, these technology lines, mobile phones or internet or smartphones, how quickly are they moving through the population? So if you see, all numbers are increasing, education is generally going up, okay, but technology is moving faster than education through our society. Okay, it is reaching out to people more and more through our society. So our challenge then is to actually design for this other group of people, right? So we tend to call these other groups into 3 groups actually. People who are 10th standard educated or less, they are literate, but what we have found is that most often, and they have studied a little bit of English, but excuse me, most often their English is not good enough for them to allow for using devices in English, like using phones or using websites in English. So they actually struggle with English content. Okay, so we call them as non-English literate users. The next group is barely literate users. These people are usually primary school or less educated. They can read and write, but with some difficulty, and they really need a lot of support there. And thirdly, the group is the illiterate users. So this group is basically just not able to read and write at all. And this group is right now about 18 or 19% or 20% perhaps. So that's a picture. And we have been actually creating solutions for each of these groups. By the way, this data is sourced from several sources, including census, TRAI, etc. Okay. So we have been we really are not that, not much of our work is in the area meant for people who are more than 10 years education. Okay, maybe some of it is, but not a lot of it. Much of our work is for people who are non-English literate, barely literate, and illiterate. Okay, so this is the one picture that I wanted to kind of create for you. The other picture that I wanted to create for you is this model called user usage model, which was proposed by my PhD student and me together, called technology adoption by emergent users, the user usage model. Okay, so this is Devanuj. He is currently a faculty member in a design school in Jaipur. Right. So very briefly, I'm going to introduce this model. So this is a two-dimensional model. One dimension talks about the usage of the user. When somebody starts using a new piece of technology or a new product, so before he starts using it, he's unexposed. After he starts using it, he may be a novice, rote learner, fluent user, a competent performer, an expert. So that's one dimension of this model. And what Devanuj did was that he identified not only these stages of use, but he said that there is a reason why these are stages. So there is a reason why people are unexposed. There is a reason why people stay novices. There is a reason why people stay rote learners. And some of these may be obvious, but not all of them are obvious. So he identified that there are some barriers. So things that keep you unexposed is lack of exposure. So if, for example, and there is always technology that is coming up, new technology that is being created. And so we are always not exposed to something or the other. For example, I don't know if many of you have used any technologies related to VR, virtual reality products. Okay. So if you have not used any technologies related to VR, you are unexposed. If you have used, you are actually at least having some exposure. You're probably a novice. So that is our first barrier, lack of exposure. Second barrier is complexity. Complexity keeps people in the novice area, in the novice zone, novice stage. Then if you overcome the barrier of complexity, you hit the barrier of low frequency. Even if you use a product and become a rote learner, if you do not frequently use the product, you do not become fluent user. So it keeps you rote learner. And the next barrier is not having a conceptual model. How does a product work and how do I make things happen? If I don't have a conceptual model, then I cannot become a competent user. I cannot become a competent performer. I cannot plan things. I cannot fix errors and so on, right? And then because in our studies, we did not find any expert users, we don't know what keeps people competent performers. So these were the different barriers that Devanuj identified in different stages of use. But there is also a second dimension. What Devanuj found is that these barriers don't affect everybody equally. Okay? Some people are more affected by, say, lack of exposure or complexity. Maybe you guys, even if you have never used a VR system, you can imagine how a VR system might work. Or even if you have never used an auto-driven car, you can imagine how an auto-driven car might work. So lack of exposure will not affect some of you guys so much as it might affect somebody who has never, who has other issues or other difficulties. So what Devanuj found out is that these barriers are not of equal height. They are of varying height and they affect different groups of people differently. And so he identified the second dimension of the user usage model. We call it the user dimension. Okay, and he identified the characteristics of users in each of these, and he gave them some names, and we created some personas. So, for example, our basic user will very often stay behind complexity. Okay, and so there is a lack of. He may be able to overcome the lack of exposure barrier through exposure, but he will hide. He'll kind of get stuck behind the barrier of complexity. So, in order to explain this better, Devanuj came up with these personas. So, Surya, who is a 50-year-old tailor who is educated till class 6th and he owns a feature phone, he is our persona for a basic user. What can he do? He can understand and use hardware buttons. So he can receive calls by pressing the green button. He can make calls from a recently dialed number list. Again, he presses the green button and he gets a list of recently called calls. He gets a list of recently dialed numbers, and then he can sort of go up and down in that list and then make a call. Or he can dial numbers by using the keypad like on landline phones, because he has written numbers somewhere. And he's educated, right? He's class 6th, so he can read and write and store his numbers in a physical phone book. What he cannot do, what Surya cannot do, is navigate hierarchies. He lacks the ability of abstraction. He cannot use apps such as alarm, radio, or music. He cannot read an SMS. He has never read an SMS in his life. Not because he cannot read and write, but just because he does not know where the SMS comes and how do I navigate to that place and so on. So he lacks the ability to do abstract thinking, which is required for navigators. So just to give you an example of what I mean by that, so we had once done an experiment as part of another project where we showed people a picture of bananas like this, and we gave them a call and we asked them a question. If you see mangoes, press 1. If you see apples, press 2. If you see bananas, press 3. And if you see grapes, press 4. They asked a question like this, then people could actually do the task. There was no problem. Okay, because if there are bananas, they can see, they understand what is being done, and they can read the number, so they can press 3. There is no problem very often. However, if you change the question, if you ask the question, if you see flowers, press 1. If you see fruits, press 2. If you see vegetables, press 3. If you see grains, press 4. Then people will struggle with this task because there are no fruits in the world. A fruit is an abstract category, and a banana is an example or an instance of that category. Okay, so this requires some ability of abstraction, and some users have it. So of course, many users could do this task, but there was a group of users who could not do this task. Okay, so we call them as basic users. They do not have the ability to do abstraction, so therefore they cannot navigate hierarchies. Okay, what we also found is that we can teach people to navigate hierarchies. So that is not difficult, but you have to teach them. It does not come automatically to them. Okay. Yeah, so many of these users can use feature phones because there is a green button and a red button, and you have to just press the green or red button to kind of do many of the functions or dial the number or something like that. There is some hierarchy there, but many of these users do not follow that hierarchy, do not do the hierarchy. Of course, India is known for its electronic voting for more than 20 years now, and even the most illiterate of people are able to use the EVM to cast their votes. So that is the power. So they can actually, and if you notice, the EVM, though it's an electronic device, does not have hierarchy. Okay, they can use television, they can use channel plus or minus or volume up and down. So they can sort of navigate linearly in that sense, but they cannot do hierarchical navigation. Okay, or they can use other devices like lifts and so on, which are also again computer systems, but there is hardware button there. There is no abstraction and so on. So basic users can do these things. So navigators are the next step, are people who can navigate hierarchies. And our persona for doing that is Naveen Kumar. He's a 45-year-old grocer. He has studied slightly more than Surya till 10th standard. And nowadays, he owns a cheap smartphone. Earlier, he used to also use a feature phone until very recently. He can do everything that Surya does. In addition to that, he can also navigate hierarchies. He can look up contacts. He can look up missed calls. He can use the camera, play songs. So he can use various apps that are there on the phone. He can watch movies and so on. He can read WhatsApp messages, but not frequently. So he is a navigator. What he cannot do is he cannot explore interfaces, does not troubleshoot, does not type text neither in English nor in Tamil, which is his mother tongue, and does not save contacts. He delegates this. He knows that he can save contacts, but he does not do it himself. He gives it to someone else. The reason why he does not save contacts is because he cannot type text. Okay, and for the same reason, he does not write SMS, and most importantly, he does not search. Okay, so he does everything through navigation. He does all the tasks through navigation. So a navigator can overcome the barrier of complexity to some extent because he has the ability to do abstraction, but he usually does not use devices frequently and so does not therefore become fluent. But they can do many things. They can look for news, read news, usually by navigating, not by searching. They can look at entertainment programs. Usually, a lot of consumption of YouTube and Hotstar and all these other entertainment programs happen are done by navigators. and then they can do WhatsApp, mainly browsing and being part of various groups and so on. Right. So that's our navigator. Our next user group is text inputter. Now, text inputters are a lot more tech savvy than navigators. They can text input, and therefore they can easily overcome the barriers of complexity. It does not affect them that much. And they can also overcome the barrier of low frequency, and they're reasonably infrequent users. Of course, they don't have, they cannot really develop conceptual models of all the products that they're using, and therefore they generally do not plan out things. They just do things fluently, but without planning and understanding how things work. So Sriram is a 35-year-old cement dealer, studied till class 10th also, and these days owns his second smartphone. It's a mid-range smartphone. He can do everything that Naveen Kumar does. In addition to that, he can save and browse contacts. Mostly he does that in English, although his mother tongue is Hindi. He does that in English because he does not, for him, Indian language text input is still relatively more difficult than English for him. Okay, and he has studied till class 10th, remember, so he has some reasonable exposure to English. He can use SMS and WhatsApp and products like that. Though he mostly reads, sometimes forwards, he rarely types. Although he's a text inputter, he is not really a frequent text inputter in that sense. The most important thing that he can do with text input and that he does with text input is search. So he can search for information, he can search for contacts, he can search for many, many things. Okay. What he cannot do is save or transfer files. He has no notion of digital space. He's a text inputter, but the next group is saver, and they have a notion of digital space, and Sriram does not have. He's a text inputter. So he does not use things like file managers and so on. So for example, if he has to look up some file that somebody sent him, he'll probably look at find that image, locate that image using WhatsApp or the camera app or something like that, but not using the file manager. So by sequential navigation or by hierarchical navigation, but not by using the file manager, which is a slightly different and alien concept for him. So our next, and of course, what can a text inputter do? He can search, and he can search entertainment, he can search for news, and he can search for contacts. And so search is the primary sort of killer app for text inputters, I would say. And then of course they can do a few of the other things also. Right, savers, and our persona for that is Pratik. He's a 30-year-old younger guy, local politician, class 12th educated. He owns an expensive smartphone. He can do everything that Sriram does. In addition to that, he can input text fluently, mostly in Romanized Marathi. He can do things like change desktop backgrounds or ringtones, so personalization. He can protect his phone with a pattern because he realizes that there is stuff in his phone and he doesn't want that to be sort of found by other people, or even if his phone is lost, they should not be able to take stuff out of it. So he protects his phone with a pattern. He does not respond. He's not very socially active though on the phone, although he's a politician. He's sort of lot more, like he's socially active on the phone while speaking, but he does not, respond to email unless you call him and say that, look, I sent you an email, so why don't you respond to that or something like that. He does not have the notion of a digital identity. So account holders have a notion of digital identities, and they are sort of they tend to be the ones who are a lot more educated and tech savvy and so on. So they use social media for their purposes. Like this is a 49-year-old jeweler who's a graduate, owns a smartphone and a laptop, and maintains an active social media profile for his business. He follows social etiquette and so on. Although he has trust issues with online transactions, maybe in the pandemic he has started doing online transactions. So this, we need to update this model with respect to post-pandemic behavior. Right. By the way, these pictures were drawn by my father, who is an illustrator. Right. So this is our model, and our focus is actually on the lowest three categories: basic users, navigators, and text inputters. Savers, account holders, and transactors are sort of the upper categories, which are important, but we are not sort of that much into them, right? So one of the things, one of the design challenges for us is how do we make sure that basic users can do things that a navigator does. So for example, so one way of doing that could be to take away the need to navigate a hierarchy. So, and mainly a lot of this is sort of targeted to barely literate and illiterate users. So I'm going to kind of show some examples of this, which is work from IDC. So this is work of Nikhil Karwal from 2007, where he designed a mobile phone for illiterate users. And if you kind of zoom in closely, so it's a feature phone, but in 2007 it's mainly feature phones. But you know, one of the things that he did was, even in feature phones there is a lot of navigation, right? So he took away the needs for navigation, and he put all that navigation in a physical dial, and you rotate the dial, and then that will allow you to do things. Or I could talk about another project that was done in 2010. So I'm going to skip this because all of you guys are from India. So what Ruchika believed was that we could actually make letter forms tangible, physical letter forms tangible. That will make them easier to learn. And this is how we can support illiterate users in learning language. So this was her first prototype. It was kind of fairly crudely done. And then she tested it out and she realized that it doesn't really work very well because it needs a dark room and it needs people to stand and work. And here, this is an adult illiteracy class. So class for adult illiterates to learn literacy, acquire literacy. And most people here sit and work. So if they're sitting and working, then how do you provide them with that support? So she changed her technology and she made it an OCR based technology, where there was a camera on the top and then it was looking at it from above, and this was more suitable. And then she tried out with a lot of users. So here is and one of the challenges that she faced was that users or participants in the classes tend to sort of wait for somebody else to talk to them. The teacher has to talk to them. They do not sort of self-engage. They are not self-learners. They have been not in school for a very long time, so they don't really have that learning on their own. So what Ruchika wanted to do was to enable people to kind of play around on their own. And if you saw in this video, in spite of the fact that she had something that she could play around on her own, she still was constantly talking to Ruchika, who is the person who is sitting with her back to us in the camera, right? And what Ruchika wanted was that the student should actually learn on her own. And after a few minutes of playing around with this technology, you will find that she actually moves a few inches ahead, maybe just 1 or 2 inches ahead.
Aki matram. No. No. Go. Aki matram. No. Come on.
You can say she's not completely on her own, but still she's actually sort of able to do things and play around and right. So, but if you see, it takes away the need to navigate a hierarchy. There is no hierarchy in this interactive product. Okay, so it's not hierarchical navigation. Another option is to use audio to direct navigation. Okay, and I'm going to kind of refer here to a work of a South African Irish researcher living in South Africa. Okay, so most of you see here that there are 3 buttons in the screen, right? So imagine that you are actually booking a taxi or an auto or something like that, and you have shown some buttons. So here are some example buttons on your screen, and you identify them as buttons, and then you can just figure out how to click, right? So this is a story of a very well-known researcher, unfortunately, is no more. His name is Gary Marsden. He actually did much of his work in South Africa. And this is a talk that he gave in 2007 CHI conference on literacy, okay, and based on his experience in South Africa. So what he said was that, so for most of us, this button looks like a button, okay, because it has maybe a slightly darker outline on one side and slightly brighter outline on one side. So we tend to perceive this as button, which you can click on it, okay. But it didn't seem to work. Even if you had only one button on the screen, people were sort of they were getting confused about what they are supposed to do, okay. So then they tried actually translating it. So this is one of the South African languages. They have also got many languages. So this is one of the South African language in which they translated this as a button, and it still did not work. And then Gary Marsden came back and said that this is the theory. This is not a button. So this is a famous, if you're not familiar with it, it's called Treachery of Images, the famous painting which says that any picture that we see of any object is not the object itself. Actually, it says this is not a pipe in French. So similarly, this is not a button. Similarly, these are not buttons. These are pictures of buttons, okay? And that is why people have to interpret, oh, these are pictures of buttons, but they're actually buttons. So if I tap on them, they will get pressed like buttons. And then, so this is also literacy, okay? And this is also something that needs to be learned. It is not difficult. People can learn it, but they do not know how to do it on their own. On the other hand, if you actually gave a verbal prompt, you spoke on the phone, you said press 1 for Begumpet and press 2 for Gachibowli and press 3 for Tarnaka. Now you are actually giving a verbal prompt to the user and directing the user to do something. So you're telling the user, if you want to go to Begumpet, press 1. Right. So we used something like this in a project targeted to people living with HIV and AIDS. So this is there was a fairly large team from IDC that was working. So these are all my colleagues who are working on that project. And apart from IDC, there were many other institutes and research institutions that we collaborated with, and HIV clinics that we collaborated with. So Chennai, Pune, Chirala, Imphal, Mumbai, and Bangalore were the major contributors, but we also had another 16, 17 other clinics with which we actually collaborated in this project in the end. Okay, and then this also was in collaboration with Grameen Foundation and Johnson & Johnson. Okay, so HIV has been a major issue throughout the world, and it continues to be. And the current pandemic, of course, highlights how viruses can be lethal. So HIV, thankfully, has not been as virulent and as easy to spread as COVID. But it is. But if people get HIV, then early in the 80s, it was expected that people will die in 1 or 2 years. Okay, so there was really no treatment. Gradually, treatments developed, so we can now treat HIV, but we cannot cure people for HIV. So the treatment of HIV consists of antiretroviral therapy, which basically stops the virus from duplicating inside. Okay, and then eventually, gradually, the virus weans off in the body. It doesn't disappear, but it comes down to a very slow level, and then you can maintain it over there. But in order to also maintain it at that level, you have to constantly take your medication. If you stop your medication, the virus will come up again. Right. So there were many 37 million people in 2017 still, and most of them are in developing countries. And what has been known is giving away free medication is not a silver bullet. And though financial status was the most common reason for poor adherence, respondents receiving free drugs had lower adherence. Other reasons included severe depression, less education, unemployment, high CD4 count, high body resistance to H virus, hospitalization, side effects, pill burden, and so on. So in 2009, each year about 170,000 people. So remember, we're talking about in the second wave, approximately 200,000 people died in COVID. Okay, so in 2009, every year 170,000 people were dying because of HIV. Okay, so it is a severe burden. okay, in India also. And in spite of the fact that in India, ART medication has been available, affordable, free even in government hospitals for several years before 2009 and continues to be free even in 2021. So ultimately what we found out is that there is a large information component in the treatment of HIV. It is not enough to just give people some medicine. You have to tell them give them a lot of information. So we went and looked at how the whole ecosystem of PLHA in India works. We went and talked to doctors, we went and talked to counselors, we talked to patients. We looked at how clinics work, what are the information needs, how do people take pills, what are the socio-cultural issues, and what are the financial issues that PLHA face. We had major findings. We had a few papers on this. So firstly, counseling is insufficient, repetitive, and difficult to retain. Like what happens is after waiting for 2 hours or 3 hours, you will get a 10-minute appointment with a counselor. And then the counselor will give you all the information blah, 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 in 10 minutes. And you kind of get bombarded and you will not remember that. So the people living with HIV/AIDS get too much information in one go. Not much of it is relevant or trustable. This studies were done in 2010, and one thing that we found is that nobody reads SMS, but SMS reminders help with pill adherence. Like people don't read SMS, that is known, very well known in India. But when the SMS comes, the phone gives a beep or a ring, and then when that happens, that reminds people that today I have to take a medication. Okay, so or now I have to take my medication. So it becomes a reminder, and we use that. If you remember in those days, Google Calendar, if you made events in Google Calendar, you used to get SMSs. Okay, and these days Google stopped in about 2015 or so. Google stopped sending SMS because we have other things that will give us notifications. Okay, so we use this feature of Google Calendar to send reminders to people to see how people work, and we found that was very useful. Some people have family support, so culturally and socially there were other issues. Some people have family supports, and that was very useful. However, some people did not have family support, and they did not want their family members to know that they were HIV positive. Quite a few people who are HIV positive don't want their family members to know that. And incidentally, HIV is spread throughout the society. It is not only a poor people's disease or a rich person's disease or only middle class. It is throughout the community, throughout the society, you will find HIV. And you will find that we found that there is a lot of power distance between the doctors and the patients. So, which means people both trusted the doctors, but they're also afraid of the doctors about asking too many questions to the doctors or seemingly questioning the doctors. They were afraid. And there were also gender issues because HIV is associated with issues related to sexual relations and things like that. And then if the doctor is a female, then male patients don't want to talk to her. Or if the doctor is male, then the female patients don't want to talk to him. Or counselors. So majority of the doctors that we talk to are males. Majority of the counselors that we talk to are females. Again, that does not work very well with counselors either. So based on this, we came up with a system which is hopefully usable, reachable to a large number of people, affordable and available. So this video kind of shows a glimpse of what it does.
Tama is an interactive voice response system that calls HIV patients at pill times to remind them to take their medicine. Tama gives them information about HIV in 30-second nuggets called health tips. If a patient faces a symptom, he may call Tama to get doctor's advice. Access to Tama is protected by a PIN to prevent accidental disclosure. Tama was tried by 54 people living with HIV/AIDS for a period of 12 weeks.
By the way, just checking, could you guys hear the sound? Yeah, okay, good, thank you. Right. So yeah, so the system calls people just after their pill time to remind them that by now you should have taken your pill. And if you have taken your pill, press 1, else press 2 or whatever. And then once they know, once you have said that I've taken my pill, then they will give you feedback saying that this month, for the last 1 month, you have been 95% adherent. Very good, or something like that. If you're not feeling well, then you can call this system and then ask that if I have fever, or if I have cough, or if I am having nausea, or I'm vomiting, or whatever. And then it also gives you personalized health tips. By personalized, we mean it will say it will be based on your when you started on this system, and also based on the clinic that you are in, based on the regimen that you are following, and so on. So it will be personalized to some extent. It is protected by PIN. So if somebody else answers your call, then they will not hear anything. They will just hear music. And then when you hear music, you are supposed to enter a 4-digit PIN, and then that will get you into the system. And lastly, it is localized to a clinic. So although it's the same system that is calling, to the patient, it feels like the call is coming from their doctor's office, from the doctor's clinic. Okay. So therefore, and that actually helps us leverage the trust. It is not an unknown system from some unknown agency. It is from the local doctor. Okay, so we evaluated this product to make sure that it is usable, reachable to a large number of people, affordable and available. We actually deployed this system for a period of 12 weeks with about 50 odd people, and made sure that it was usable, reachable to a large number of people, affordable, available, and so on. The pill time reminders were used extensively, especially like they were used like a snooze. So Professor Balasubramaniam, I'm just checking with you. How much time do I have? How much time more do I have?
So till 11:30, sir.
Till 11:30, right?
Yeah, you can take till 11.
Thank you, boss. Right. So pill time reminders were used extensively, especially the snooze option. The adherence feedback worked very well. The system helped develop good habits. People started taking their pills on time. They started waiting for the pill and so on. No cheating was reported, which means people were very honest, at least in our reports to the extent that we can tell. People who faced symptoms called the system first, but some also called just to explore the symptoms. And this actually caused some false alarms because they were not really sick or something like that, but they just wanted to know how this system works. They were trying to press some buttons to figure it out, and which is a good thing. And but of course, it confused some of the people in the clinic. The health tips were a great hit. While people can pull information, like they can actually navigate information and pull, what we found is that pushing information, especially after you get your adherence feedback, you could get a particular health tip. That will be even better. And what we found was that PIN was secure enough. So generally, there are a lot more findings, but these are some of the main findings. And we have a paper on this in CHI 2014. You might be interested in looking at that. Subsequently, this technology was deployed in real life settings. So actually, subsequently, it went through a clinical trial first with about 300 patients for a year. So that took a couple of years, and then it was deployed in 3 ART centers. About 1,000 people, I believe now, or about 800 people were using it in December 2019. And now I think about 1,000 people are using it, is what I was told. We are now, once the research was over, we are out of it. So this is being managed now by Johnson & Johnson themselves in a commercial setting. Right. So this was an example of how we can use audio to direct navigation. And then this is the work of one of my another PhD students, Abhishek Srivastav, who is actually a faculty member now in IIT Guwahati. So he worked on what is called as audio-visual interfaces. So audio interfaces like these IVR kind of systems that I just showed examples of, which can be used in interesting ways, of course. But audio-visual interfaces where you can combine IVR style audio and visual interfaces. And I'm going to just briefly play a example. So this is the work of Abhishek Srivastav from 2014, where he explored this idea to actually support the visuals along with the audio.
अन्य धान का भाव जानने के लिए एक दबाएं। फलों का भाव जानने के लिए 2 दबाएं। सब्जियों का भाव जानने के लिए 3 दबाएं। चावल का भाव जानने के लिए 1 दबाएं। गेहूं का भाव जानने के लिए 2 दबाएं। चने का भाव जानने के लिए 3 दबाएं। बासमती चावल का भाव जानने के लिए 1
Right. So I'm just going to skip that part. But basically, we can support. So what we found is that as soon as we provide a visual support to audio navigation, then the ability of the users to actually navigate, that gives the users the ability to navigate broader hierarchies and also navigate deeper hierarchies. So we have a couple of papers on this topic actually. And there are several reasons why we believe that this system works better than pure audio. Right. So these were examples of how we can help basic users do tasks that navigators would do otherwise. Okay. Now we have some examples of how we can help navigators do tasks that normally could be done only by text inputters. And I'm going to show some examples with respect to this. So again, there are many ways of doing this. One option is to take away the need to input text. Okay. And this work is primarily targeted to what we can call as the barely literate users, the middle group basically. So they are not very tech savvy, they're not highly literate, so they cannot type text also. So much of this work is targeted towards this group. Okay, so this is work that we did in collaboration with in collaboration with 4 other people, Nikhil Velankar, Kirti Kanetkar, Yash Sheikh, and Naveen Bagalkot. They are all now successful, extremely sought after people in the world, in different parts of the world. Yeah, so this is about creating a phone book. This is back in 2008 again, where we are looking at how we can create a phone book that can be navigated by people more easily. Okay, so there were what we went and looked at was what is the kind of phone books that people had, and back in the in that period. This is pre-smartphone days, so people did not really have smartphones and people were not storing that many contacts in their phones. Okay, so we wanted to find out what's going on. So what we found that people were still having physical phone books in which they stored between 40 to 80 contacts. And interestingly, actually, these diaries actually reflected a lot of cultural identity. You can see this picture of Goddess Lakshmi here, or you can see the tricolor Indian flag in this. So there is a lot of this personal association with these phone books. What we found, this study was done in Maharashtra, so text is always in Marathi. The numbers were sometime in English and sometimes in Marathi. The English tabs on the right were almost never used, or at the most they were used like page numbers or something like that. There were never really any Marathi tabs that we could find, and there was no Marathi alphabetical order. So because it was in English and many of the users that we were looking at were not familiar with English, their level of education was not high enough that they were familiar with English. And remember, English is in most schools in India, which are what we call as non-English schools. English as a second language is started only in class 5 or class 6 or something like that. And till then, they do not really have exposure to English. So as a result, they generally did not use, we believe, the alphabetical order of those tabs on the right. Okay, so these phone book tabs. What we found was that entries were stored in a sequence of writing. People left extra spaces in case of phone number changes, and there were frequent phone number changes. So people actually left, they organized their phone books pretty well, some people. Then they remembered the phone number according to its location in the phone book rather than according to a, so like they remembered the phone number is stored on the top part of the page or left side of the page or whatever it is. And then they will actually look for it over there. All right. People did store some contacts in their phones, mobile phones, even in 2009. But many people, because they were not very English savvy, they did not use, they did not save those contacts and they were not text inputters, if you remember. So they did not save those contacts in a meaningful way. I mean, things like A1 or whatever. So they created mnemonics basically, or friends or other people help, younger people help people store. So all of this basically gave us idea that maybe we should actually come up with a phone book. So if you see, I'm going to ask you to do this exercise while you take out your phone and unlock it and go to the phone book. Okay. Go into your phone book and go into the contacts. And the normal way for most people is to search for a contact, right? So you type out, you go in here and there's a keyboard at the bottom that will come, and then you will type out the name, right? So don't use search, okay? Go back and browse and see how many contacts you have, and try to call your friend or your husband or wife or children or anything, anybody basically, but without using the search feature, okay? And it is very difficult. So if you don't use the search feature, it is very, very challenging for most people. So, and then this is the solution that we designed in response to this problem.
One.
So when you open the diary,
Lal.
you get multiple
One.
colors of a diary. And if you open a particular color,
5.
then you will get that particular contact. So basically think of a diary that has multiple colors. So the first digit is associated with the color, and the second digit is associated with the contact that is stored on that page of the diary. Okay, so the first you choose a color and that chooses a page, and the second chooses a contact that is associated with that page. Right. We compared this style of navigation with the traditional navigation, and this won out very, very easily for almost all users that we tried with. Okay. So this is an example where we take away the need to input text. The second example was where we can base text input on the structure of the script. So we look at how the script is structured, and this is where the work on Swarachakra comes in. And this is where actually many people, so Professor Bal Subramaniam mentioned that, some of his students had also worked. So in fact, many people have contributed. About 100 people over the last 10 years have contributed to this project. It all started with as a student project of Aniket Sarangar, who's here, but so many more people actually contributed it and have maintained it. The person who's maintaining it the most is Manjiri Joshi. The first version was created by Padma Srinivasan. Madhukiran and Manideep actually created the second version of it. But each of these people have actually done substantial contributions over the years and have informed our work going forward, right? And this is a classic problem. So we had a beautiful mural put up in our showcase area in IDC, and so because it was delicate, somebody put up a signage which said, "Please do not touch." The English signage was typed out, as you can see, whereas the Hindi signage was written by hand. So this has been a classic problem, and so we wanted to actually help people overcome such a problem, at least on their phones. So this is like a menu-driven keyboard. You can think of it this way. So it kind of reduces many issues. And so it is very, very specific keyboard. You can see its unique design compared to many other keyboards that you used. And I can just give a 1.5 hour lecture only on the Swarachakra keyboard. So we had developed also, thanks to so many people, we developed keyboards and layouts in multiple languages. So we had Hindi, we have Marathi and Bengali here. And we have, I think this is Gujarati, Malayalam and Assamese. And we have, I think Kannada, Konkani, Punjabi and Tamil. And we have Kannada, Telugu and Odia, I think. Yeah. Good. Over the last, you haven't done much work on this product for the last 2-3 years. But right in the beginning, 2013, 8 years ago, when Padma actually created the first version, we decided to put this out on Play Store. Okay, and we in the last 8 years we've had about 80 lakh downloads, 8 million downloads in various languages with relatively very less effort. So that is the power. I mean, this is really not meant to be a product. It was really an experimental prototype that we had created for people in our lab to play around with and do some experiments with. But as you can see, it is kind of continuously growing, and it's growing on its own, more or less. Some languages are growing much more. So Bengali, Tamil, Marathi are very, very popular. But all languages keep growing to some extent in terms of its downloads. Right. We also did lots of experimentations with this. This particular one was published in 2016, then in 2015, where we actually compared 4 different keyboards. One of them was Swarachakra, but we also compared. So SwiftKey here is a fairly high-end keyboard which has all the technologies associated with flow writing or swiping, as it is called, or flow writing, or gesture-based typing. Sidakin script is the classic Indian government keyboard. Sparsh is another one which has prediction, and Swarachakra. And we were actually expecting that compared to all of these, because of this prediction and so on, Swarachakra will not do very well in comparison with all of this. But we actually were quite surprised at the result. So this is mean characters per minute. So how many characters can you type in 1 minute? So typically people start out around 15 or 20 characters per minute. That's quite slow, like 1 character per 4 seconds, that's the rate at which they're going. And then gradually they ramp up to around 40 to 50 characters per minute. So that's about a little more than a second per character. Okay. So that's how it seems to, and then it kind of tends to slowly increase after that. I mean, it does not really increase very rapidly after that with practice. And then on the x-axis, what you see is the number of sessions. So each session consists of 10 phrases, typing 10 phrases. So maybe at the end of 30 sessions, you type 300 phrases. Each phrase is about 5 or 6 words. So maybe they have typed 300 into 5, which is 1500 words, maybe around 1400 words or so at the end of it. Right. So we did that, and so that seems to work then. So what we changed the text input mechanism, and we made it based on the structure of the script, and that helped some users at least to move from being navigators to being text inputters in Indian languages. And then of course in the last 5-6 years, the use of audio has grown, and so we actually incorporated some of this in Swarachakra for a while.
जबलपुर जाने की टिकट कितने की है? जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे.
So as you know, audio, speech-based text input can be accurate or inaccurate. So as you can see, she said Janagana Mana, and it kind of made several mistakes in recognizing that. So that is the problem with text input. With voice, it tends to be error prone.
आज इंडिया की लड़कियां लड़ाकू विमान चला रही हैं.
Yeah, so it needs correction. So whether that correction
वंदे
is
मातरम
still,
बंकिम चंद्र चटर्जी द्वारा संस्कृत में रचा गया.
whether that correction still leads you to reasonably accurate text input is the question. So what we did was we ran an experiment where we gave these 2 keyboards to 2 different groups of users, similar users in the same class and so on. Then after about 20 sessions of practice, remember each session is about 10 phrases, 50 words. After 20 sessions of practice, one of the groups we gave them voice-based input. Okay, so they started off in a similar way, around 20 characters per minute. They reached around 40 characters per minute back in 20 sessions. And then one group we gave them voice, and they suddenly shot up to about 120 characters per minute, which is good. And then the other group we switched around at around 35th session, and then that group actually went ahead and typed another 15 sessions with voice. And again, so if you see, these people are all between 100 to 140 characters per minute, and then this is gradually improving also. Right. The last project that I want to talk about, and then I'll pause. I'll take another 5-6 minutes, and then I'll pause for questions. Which is about bringing the human in the loop. And there are many people who have tried this approach. And so I'm going to just present one of our project. So this project we did in collaboration with Swansea University in the UK. So we have colleagues on both sides, and so all of these people contributed to these projects. And over the last several years, we have actually worked together on many projects. So this is just one of those projects. So in this particular project, we were interested in question answering systems of conversational agents or conversational, like Alexa or Google Now or those kind of products. So we wanted to know how people are comparable to machines in answering questions. So we wanted to compare machines and people. Who's answering the question, human beings or machines? But of course, the good thing about machines is that they can answer the question instantly, whereas people take more time. So how much time do people take, or how much, or answering time is another dimension. Okay, so are the answers instant or delayed, right? Of course, there are already many existing products in this space. So we are interested in machine-powered instant versus human-powered delayed, comparing these systems basically. And there are already many existing systems. So there is Google Assistant, Siri, Google Home, Amazon Echo. There's also a product that Google has now, I think, closed called Google Neighborly. There is experimentation called Question Box. Our own work in an earlier project was a Wizard of Oz based approach, which was like human-powered instant answering system, where the people sitting at the back Googling and answering questions. Right. So this is some sort of a design space, and we are interested in these two groups. We had created two products. One is called Streetwise Machine-Powered Instant and Streetwise Human-Powered Delayed. So two systems. And we are sort of comparing these two systems. The unique thing about our product also, which is kind of different from all of these others, is that we decided to try our system in public spaces, hence the name Streetwise. It's in public spaces. Okay. So if you see Google Assistant and Siri, they are personal devices, or Google Neighborly is also personal device. Google Home, Amazon Echo, these are sort of not personal, but they are still, if you have used them, they are not really your individual thing. They're like home device, you can say. Okay. So they share, the usage is shared by 3 or 4 people. Whereas we wanted to do a public device, something that is out on the street. So we actually made 2 prototypes. One was a machine-powered instant prototype. The way it worked was that it has one big blue button on it. You press the big blue button and you state your question. Okay. And the question gets sent to Google Speech through the Google Speech API to the system, and we retrieve an answer and we play it back. Almost, it takes 3 or 4 seconds, typically, depending on the internet speed, for all this system to work. But 3 or 4 seconds, you get the answer basically. The other system is human power delayed. So you press the big blue button and you ask the question. Then the system will show on the screen over here a number. You are supposed to remember this number or write it down. And then it takes 10 minutes. You come back after 10 minutes and then you key in the number and then you will hear the answer. And we wanted to deploy this product in Dharavi, which is a slum in Mumbai. You might have heard of it. It is the largest slum in Asia. And slums are generally considered to be, dirty and filled with holes, and there is like water on the streets, and like it's not clean, and a lot of poor people live there, and so on, which is true about Dharavi. A lot of poor people live there, and it has these shanty, small houses. Some of them are 2-storied, some of them are 1-storied, and so on. But it's like this. But Dharavi is also very, very industrial slum. So it is a very entrepreneurial slum. So there are factories in Dharavi. There is a lot of work. So it is. So Dharavi is in fact known as a poor little rich slum. It provides employment to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people actually. Lakhs of people work in Dharavi. Not only live in Dharavi, but they also work there. And it makes money. Dharavi is not a poor place in that sense. It is a very, very thriving economy. Okay, so we deployed this for a period of about a month each or 2 months or something. And then as the answers came in, we analyzed the answers. There were two kind of systems, machine powered instant, which is on the left, and human powered delayed, which is on the right. So if you see, the graphs show which answers were relevant. Like, the user asks a question, the machine gives an answer, and then we went and analyzed and checked each and every answer to see if the answer was relevant. So which answers were relevant, which answers were irrelevant. So people gave an answer, but that was not a relevant answer. It was a wrong answer. That means the machine did not understand, or the human did not understand what was the question. And machines or humans said, don't know or can't answer. And then we categorized the questions into different types. So if you see overall, human beings did much better than machines, the first line. Okay. And then when there were questions, again, those numbers are similar. So very often, many of the questions were basic facts, and humans did very well. Some were contextual, again, human did very well. Some were directed at the machine, and somehow the machine did very well there. And some were philosophical, again, humans did pretty okay, at least in half of the cases. Of course, sometimes people did not ask a question. People made a statement. No, this is stupid, or this is not, or this is fun. So they're just making a statement, in which case you don't need an answer. But you can still respond saying, oh, thank you very much. Oh, do you think it is stupid? So sad. Right. So again, there will be a relevant response or an irrelevant response. So if it's a statement, or sometimes it's a request, play some music, or increase your volume or something like that. So if people ask basic facts like what is the capital of Saudi Arabia, or I am in Dharavi, very Sony fast food, that is contextual, or philosophical questions like why does an honest person get some bad luck, or which came first, the chicken or the egg, or just play some music. Okay. So, and some of them were local. This is another way of classifying the questions. Some of them were local questions. I am in Dharavi, very Sony fast food. Usually machines are not very good at answering such questions. Sometimes people just made it like a search term, and there actually humans somehow just typed out the search in Google perhaps and then answered that question. Some were personal, and machines were completely floundered by such questions like who stole my meter cable? It's a very personal question. Or some of them were about predictions, like who will become the next prime minister. So this was a prediction that you couldn't have made. This was done before the last election, general election. Some questions were subjective. Which is the best footballer in the world? It's debatable who is the best footballer. Some were advice related. What should I do to impress a girl? And then, of course, a lot of people ask this question strangely, what is the time? But my favorite question is this. So somebody asked the machine, who is the Prime Minister of America? And then this question was fed back to the system. And this question was fed into the system, and the system could not answer this question. But this question was asked to a human operator, and he said there is no Prime Minister of America. They have a president, and his name is Donald Trump. Right. So bringing human in the loop. So I wanted to leave you with these pictures. So one was this picture showing how technology is penetrating our society very, very rapidly. And although people are getting educated and they're developing their abilities and so on, technology penetrates society a lot faster than we can educate our population. Okay. So that is one picture. And therefore we need to design. It's not that, 20 years later, 50 years later or something like that, all these problems will be gone and we'll just be happily using the technology and everybody will be the same. Everybody is not going to remain the same. There is always going to be variation in the society. Okay, so we need to find strategies and methods by which we can design for different groups of people. This is the other picture that I wanted to leave you with, which is this user usage model. and how we can actually push up people who are doing basic users to help them do navigator tasks, what design strategies we should use in our product designs, and what can we do to help navigators do text inputter tasks. So I hope this was useful. So just to kind of summarize, many ICT solutions, many technology-based solutions for emergent users are now realistic. The next cool opportunities are perhaps in designing for these new users as existing opportunities saturate. The future is ours to create, and it is almost there. We have the opportunity to find the right solutions for many problems that have plagued majority of the people in the world. And emergent users are not like one big blob of people. Designing for emergent users is not designing for one group of people. The user usage model describes one way to understand this complexity. There may be other ways, more ways, and things keep changing. We are already feeling that the user usage model is already just 7-8 years. It is already outdated, and particularly the pandemic has changed a lot. But even otherwise, even without the pandemic, things were already changing a lot, and therefore we need to actually rework on the model. So here is what you can do. Work on the problems around you. The world develops because of what you do. Work with us on problems in developing countries. If you're interested, you are welcome to join us. We are always looking for researchers. We are looking for PhD students. If you would like to do a PhD in these areas, do approach us, and we will work out a PhD topic for you. Or if you're interested in doing a master's, you can also join us for a master's program. If you're interested in working with the community, I just wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about two things. We actually started a Google group. We have now created, this has been around for again 7-8 years. We created an organization called HCI Professionals Association of India, HCI PAI, and we have a Google group also now, which was recently created about just 15 days ago. We created this Google group, but there are already more than 180 people on that group. So you are welcome to join that group. This is the URL. I will be sending you the link to this slide in a minute. This is the URL to that. And of course, HCI Professional Association of India organizes a conference called India HCI every year. Okay, we've been doing it for many years now. So the next one is if COVID allows, if there's no third wave, there's no problems, then in November, we are planning to do it in Pune. If COVID does not allow, then we will still do it on the same dates, but virtually. So, so that's it. I don't think I have anything else to present today. So yes, Shilpa, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Hello, sir. I'm basically a master's in design from NIT Ahmedabad and have about 14 years of industrial experience now. But I have always been very keen to associate with the IDC in some way. So I would really love to, associate if there is any project or any upcoming research studies you would, need.
We are currently working on 4 different research projects.
But the only thing is that I am now in Hyderabad. I was in Bombay for 16 years, just shifted during the pandemic. So, but I would still be, really keen to associate.
You can write to me on that email address.
This one, aniruddha@iitbombay.ac.
iitb.ac.in. Yes, you're welcome to write to me.
Definitely get in touch.
And we can work out something. We are constantly looking for people to help us in different
Sure.
projects.
It will be a pleasure. Looking forward, sir.
Thank you. Ganesh has a question. Who answers the question in human power delayed system? So actually, the system was created such that it was supposed to be a open system where anybody could answer. But we actually had, for the purpose of the research project, we had trained a bunch of people to actually do the answering at the back end so that the users get a quick response. So the system is set up in such a way that it can be openly answered. Thank you for your question.
Okay, are there any more questions for sir? So just as they ping, in fact, I think it is sheer accidental match or something. On the first day, I actually wanted to have Professor R. Kalyanakrishnan. He's my former teacher at IIT Madras. who was among these solvers who established the computer science department at IIT Madras in 1970s. But due to age constraints, and he still is not comfortable with this online. You understand the old people's constraints, right? So he said, I may not be able to come, but he shared a slide, which I'll quickly share so that. 1 minute, sir. Sorry for
I'll
delay.
stop sharing. No problem.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Not yet. Oh, yeah. Hopefully. It came
Now,
in
sir,
there.
is it coming?
Yeah, now it is coming.
Yeah, so he is my teacher at IIT Madras. In fact, I was really amazed by the one-liner he had to convey the importance of the workshop. He had asked, stay human as you interact with the technology of this day. Right? So, in fact, the way you also rounded up with various products and all, right? Where the focus is on trying to solve problems which our community of users actually face. I think the opening and the ending possibly are converging, right? It's almost sheerly accidental or coincidental. So thank you very much, sir. In fact, some of the student faces I could recollect from that Swaraj Chakra team also. I have forgotten the names over the years. 1 or 2 faces I could recollect.
Thank you for sending the students. We are always looking for people.
Sure, sir.
Also in the chat, I have pasted the link to the slides. You're welcome to take it.
Yes, sir. We'll download it and share it with the audience. And definitely we'll keep this association going further. I think for next 1 or 2 years, it most probably will be online. But definitely we will keep. But in between, there has been a lull because people are these days getting the computer science kids, right? They quickly jump into some companies. So definitely, I'll keep this association going forward, sir.
Most welcome. Thank you for
so
inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
Okay, I think Mercy, you can download the slide and keep.